Okay, welcome everybody to a very special episode. Obviously, we haven't been doing these much because we took a little bit of time off, but with all the thing that's going on around in the football world at the moment, obviously with this Super League and stuff, Chelsea are obviously involved in it. We thought we would get on one of the best Chelsea journalists in, reporting on us, corresponding on us, Liam Twomey from The Athletic. He's going to give us basically hopefully some, more insight into this, because obviously there's a lot of rumours on social media and Twitter, but obviously Liam's more clued up than it to us. Yeah, Liam, first off, would you just like to say a quick hello to our listeners listening today?
Yeah, hi guys. I come back to you at this very uncertain time for Chelsea and for football in general. And I don't know how much certainty I can provide with my answers, but hopefully, hopefully I'll be able to help a little bit.
Yeah, that's the main thing, guys, as well. Just remember that the situation's constantly changing. Just about 20 minutes ago, we had news that Jordan Henderson was planning a meeting tomorrow with all the captains. So just remember, when Liam's answering these things can obviously change by the second, by the minute, by the hour. So, yeah. And maybe in the end, we'll talk a little bit about the Chelsea-Brighton game tonight. But obviously that has to a lot of fans, kind of died in significance compared to this. So, anyway, Dubois, obviously, would you just like to say a quick hello as well? Because obviously we're both doing this. And yeah, man, after that, we'll go for it.
Yeah, it's been a while since we did this, but it's nice to be back on and obviously have Liam on, who's been on before, and we've really enjoyed it. So we'll get straight into it. I think, Liam, we'll start with sort of your opinion on it, kind of basic ideas around what's happened recently. It was quite sudden, I guess. Not many of us expected it, especially so soon. But what were your initial reactions to it, and what did you think? I guess many fans will say the same. But what was your reaction in particular?
Yeah, I'd probably say I was shocked but not surprised, and I'll explain that because it doesn't seem to make sense. But I was shocked that it happened when it did and in the manner that it did, with just this announcement, and then the kind of drip feed of clubs issuing, the most bare bones of statements on their websites. Really, no additional detail, just kind of hiding behind this very strange Super League statement that was emailed to us. I think it was 11:15 on Sunday evening. But I wasn't entirely surprised, because I think anyone who's been paying pretty close attention to the sort of business of football, the politics of football, the finances of European football, will have seen signs over the last, over the last 20 years, but certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, that this was the direction of travel, that some form of Super League was coming at some point. And whether that would have been, like the Champions League morphing into a Super League by stealth, which is kind of what was being proposed with the Swiss model reforms that have been waved through, or an actual Super League, which is what we seem to have now. So I've always sort of regarded this as inevitable, just because when you have business-minded people and money-motivated people in charge of the biggest football clubs in the world, and that the focus is solely on increasing revenues forever, that sooner or later the existing money bubbles that exist, the Premier League TV bubble, the Champions League TV bubble, are not going to be enough for these people. And I think the pandemic has sped things up. I think the situations that Barcelona and Real Madrid find themselves in, with their finances, have sped things up. The fact that Liverpool, Arsenal, Manchester United, the three, most historic clubs of modern English football, are all owned by Americans who come from a very different ownership culture, where they are not used to the risk and jeopardy of relegation, or of not, or of failing to qualify for the Champions League, and the kind of vast differences in income that you can have year to year in European soccer. All of these things have come together now to kind of make this in my mind, it was inevitable at some point. I was just a bit shocked that it happened on Sunday. And I know Chelsea fans will probably be, a lot of Chelsea fans that feel devastated and betrayed that Abramovich has signed up to be a part of this. But I wrote a piece on Monday for The Athletic, which was basically saying that from the moment Abramovich took over the club, it was inevitable that if a Super League ever happened, Chelsea would be a part of it, because Abramovich would not have it any other way. The same things that have made him a good football club owner for all these years, investing to win trophies, buying some of the best players in the world, hiring and firing managers ruthlessly. That same desire to have Chelsea competing on the top level of the European and world game is motivating this decision. And at the end of the day, it is just his decision. The fans can make their voices heard, but the decision is ultimately his and his alone.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting, especially the fact you mentioned Abramovich and when he took over, how the Super League was always going to be something inevitable. And I think we'll touch upon who was solely responsible for this a bit later. But I think you hit the nail on the head there. I was quite surprised that maybe you felt it was, you weren't as surprised as perhaps us fans are. I think you hit the nail on the head as well in terms of the money being the driving factor. I think as fans, and at least in my opinion, at least, it's the money is sort of overridden fan interest. And I think as fans, many say that, without fans, football is nothing. And it seems as though that's been sort of betrayed by clubs, especially the big clubs. And I think in general, that's why there's so much outrage at the moment, because there's nothing without, fan interactions. No one really wants to see big clubs competing every single week, when it's just for the money. And fans have not been accounted for in this decision, which has upset me and many Chelsea fans especially. But we'll pass on to Pice. What's your opinion been on the whole situation and how it's come about?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I've been reading stuff, obviously, for like the last couple of years. People have been bringing like stuff up last couple of years saying, oh, this has been planned like for many, many years, and Perez has got it all tied up now. And it's just very sad as a fan that, this has happened, obviously, because as you said, Dubois, it just feels like, money, revenue over fans. And obviously there's planned protests outside Stamford Bridge tonight. I've seen and been messaged so many different banners and stuff. It's just going to be crazy to see what happens. Whether or not that changes the club's thinking, I highly doubt it, because every club has been protesting in numbers. I think there was over nearly 1,000 or something I read at Leeds last night. So I know they're not directly involved, but this is not just a big six issue, is it? It's a massive issue for the whole Premier League, and all the fans of clubs feel just disgusted, and so do I, to be honest. But I get that it is a business, and at the end of the day, these things can happen, and it's just a shame. Okay, Liam, so our first question for you basically is the likelihood of this actually going through. Are we getting worked up for nothing, or is this signed, sealed and delivered, as Perez says? Because I think that's the one thing I wanted to touch upon as well. Perez, is he to be believed? Because, he said there's no way no one can get out. The contracts were signed, and it's done. So what do you think on that?
Well, look, I think more generally speaking, it's dangerous to ever take Florentino Perez entirely at his word. The claim that Bayern Munich and PSG and Borussia Dortmund hadn't been approached that he made in that interview. I mean, he made a lot of claims in that interview. That one claim we know to be false. So I don't think anything is signed, sealed and delivered. I don't think anyone knows exactly what's going to happen next. Not the 12 clubs that have done this, not the European football establishment, not the domestic leagues, least of all the fans. And I think that's why you're seeing the battle that you're seeing now. The statements that we saw on Sunday night were essentially a declaration of war in European football. And how long that war will last and how exactly it will end, nobody knows. The only thing I'm reasonably confident about is that whatever we end up with will not be anything like what we had before. I don't see any way that this can go back to the status quo that we had before these statements, not least because I know UEFA have subsequently voted through the Champions League reforms that they were going to anyway, so the Swiss model will come in from 2024 regardless, which I think is a bad thing for football. I hate the Swiss model. The other thing I'm the other thing I'm reasonably confident will happen, and that maybe it's the pessimist in me, is that whatever we end up with will be worse than before, because even if this ends up being the prelude to some sort of quite tense negotiation, and to be clear, what the 12 clubs have done, including Chelsea, is not a negotiating tactics. Once you've issued statements committing to this, it's not a negotiating tactic. It is a declaration of war on the current football ecosystem. But if this does end up becoming some sort of negotiation, I think the result of that will be more power for the big clubs, because I don't think they can be discounted entirely. I don't see a world really. I'd love to think of a world in which the clubs that have dared to do this will be brought to heel by governments around Europe and by football's authorities, and that ownership changes will be enforced and conditions will be put in place to never allow this to happen again. But that feels quite naive to imagine a situation like that, and it doesn't seem like the world we're living in. So I think what's more likely to happen is that there will either a Super League will happen, possibly not in the form that that the statement suggested. That 15 plus 5 might just be an initial kind of format. It certainly didn't seem from that statement as if they'd massively thought this through, which was quite surprising given how long this has been plotted. But either we get a Super League or we get a kind of version of the Champions League, which I think is inferior to what happened before. But whatever happens, we're not going back to the European football that we've been used to seeing.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. It's sad, but I guess some of the debates I've seen from fans, like responding to like the Champions League being changed and stuff, is that yeah, they hate it, but at least it's still the Champions League. At least it's still the competition with all the history. To go into a new sort of branded league, a lot of fans just don't care about that, especially with the format. You have to apparently win a league and then you go into a quarterfinals. Like, you don't get anything for winning the actual league. Like, it just sounds a mess to me. And all the changes they want to make, like Perez was saying, oh, if the fans aren't interested, we'll have to make the game shorter. Like, are you serious? Like, what is that? And 16 to 24-year-olds are not interested in football. I mean, what a load of nonsense. What a load of nonsense. Like, honestly, in my personal opinion anyway, that's a load of nonsense. But Liam, following up on that, I just want to ask you, obviously, because there's been rumoured that Chelsea and City were so-called backed into a corner. It was the fear of missing out, sort of, rather than being the driving force behind it. First off, do you believe that? Do you buy that? And second of all, is there a possibility that there is sort of a way out through legal teams and stuff? Obviously, because we know Chelsea and City, if they decided to try and come out, it'd be a mess. But we have got some of the best legal teams in the whole world, haven't we? So what do you think will happen if we did try and get out, or as such? Yeah.
It's a great time to be a sports lawyer. Yeah, I do believe that that Chelsea and City were some of the less enthusiastic backers of this. They certainly weren't leading the charge. I wouldn't agree with the phrase "backed into a corner," because no one backs billionaires into a corner. Abramovich, Sheikh Mansour, these are people who don't have to answer to anyone. And while I believe that was probably close to the reality, because we know that Florentino Perez, the American owners of Liverpool, Manchester United and Arsenal are the one, and Andrea Agnelli, they are the people that have driven this. that is reflected in the board makeup of this proposed European Super League. There is no Chelsea representative on that board. So I do believe that's the case. I don't believe it's an excuse. And I don't think it will be viewed by anyone as an excuse. At the end of the day, all of these 12 clubs have made the same decision, whether it was their idea or not, whether they were the ones who were driving it or not. They've all made the same decision to board the same boat, which threatens to destroy the whole European and domestic football ecosystem. And all of them have to own that decision. They either have to own it or they have to ride it back now. But I don't see necessarily why they would now, because I don't know how you could have been surprised by the backlash that we've seen. Every single time a Super League has even been floated, this has been the reaction. So I don't see how any, especially all of these clubs, the PR specialists they would have paid top dollar for. It's these people's jobs to read the room. I'm sure they would have been able to predict the storm that would have followed those announcements, particularly the way it was done. As for whether there's a way out, I genuinely don't know, because none of us have seen the contracts. We don't know. Well, first of all, we don't know for sure if Chelsea have signed, if all these clubs have signed a contract. We know Perez claimed they have, but as I said, I'm not taking Perez at his word on anything. We don't know what type, and even if they have, we don't know what types of contracts they are, whether they're just letters of intent or actual binding agreements to, be in this league with substantial penalty clauses if they try and withdraw. I don't know. We've not had any indication from Chelsea so far that they are on the verge of pulling out. And that's a dangerous thing to say on a podcast, because as you say, this story is evolving by the minute. But as of now, 3:20 p.m. on Tuesday, we've heard nothing to suggest that Chelsea are having second thoughts about their decision. And there is, at least outwardly, a measure of a united front between these rebel clubs.
I think that's the most worrying thing, obviously, is because Chelsea surely were prepared for this backlash. And that's the most worrying thing, because, why would they back out now? They knew this was coming. They knew the fans would be outraged and disgusted with this. But as you say, things can change. It's by the minute, by the hour type of thing. And you never know. If it's true that Chelsea were backed in the corner and they, really don't want to do it and they're reconsidering things, then maybe they could. But it would be a mess either way. I 100% agree with that. So, Liam, something that's just come out, talking about by the minute, by the hour, there's been a report come out that basically the Chelsea pitch owners are re-examining the Stamford Bridge lease in light of Chelsea joining the Super League. The CPO board will meet to discuss this on Thursday. That's coming from a verified Daily Telegraph sport investigations reporter, Ben Rumsby.
Yeah, Ben's a very good reporter. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was going to ask you about that. Surely, obviously, you'd know about his reliability and stuff. So, what do you think of that? Because that is a pretty big threat. Chelsea fans and the owners of this are not having it, are they? That's pretty crazy if that's true.
Yeah, like I said, Ben is a very, very good reporter with a long track record of getting stories right. So I'm sure that if he's reported that, his sourcing is accurate in terms of that. That is what CPO are looking at. I've done pieces on the CPO before. It is a unique arrangement as far as I'm aware in European football, and there's maybe a possibility that it provides a measure of leverage that doesn't exist over the other English clubs. It certainly did back in 2011 when Roman Abramovich and the Chelsea board were trying to move Chelsea away from Stamford Bridge and build a stadium elsewhere, and they were trying to convince CPO to sell the freehold back to them. They were defeated in that vote narrowly, and because that is literally the reason why Chelsea is still at Stamford Bridge, and Abramovich was forced to look at options for redeveloping that site rather than moving along. As far as I'm aware, and obviously I'm not a lawyer, I haven't examined the contract in detail. As for everything I've heard about the arrangement that CPO have with Chelsea is that Chelsea cannot play their home games away from Stamford Bridge and still be called Chelsea, and still, still be Chelsea in any sort of identifiable form. I don't know how that relates to, Chelsea would still be playing their home games in the European Super League at Stamford Bridge. So I don't know how that necessarily translates. But as I said, I haven't read the contract. So I think the mere fact that, that fans are looking at these things, that fan groups are looking at these things, and that they are prepared to get creative and use any potential avenue that might be at their disposal, is just another indication of the strength of feeling against this. And yeah, we'll see what comes of it. But I think for me, the significance of it is just another sign of how militantly opposed a large section of Chelsea fans, particularly the UK-based Chelsea fan base, a lot of the ones who've been going to Stamford Bridge for years and years and years to watch this team, feel about this.
Yeah, and guys, listen to this. Obviously, let us know your thoughts in the comments below, or reply to the tweet when I send it out of the episode. Do you agree with this? Because I know pretty much most of you probably will. I've not really seen anyone that has sort of supported Chelsea in this situation. I mean, there's people that kind of like the idea of it, but they don't want Chelsea to be in it. And that's still a very, very small minority. So, I mean, yeah, going away from, obviously, this Super League, and we're going to move on, Liam, to more of the FA and FIFA. So one fan who DM'd us wants to know your view on the response to this, obviously the Super League, from the FA and FIFA to the response to the issues of racism, something which this fan in particular feels they care little about. This view was backed up by Patrick Bamford on Sky Sports yesterday, who thought basically they should show the same energy for all issues. He was saying, it's a shame that they don't do the same with racism and other different things. So, yeah, what is your view on this? What do you think of the FA and FIFA's response to this in particular, and the amount of uproar and backing they're putting behind it? But as you've seen in the past, so many issues on racism and different situations and different events that haven't really been, I guess you could say, backed as much as this, if you'd agree.
Yeah, I totally get that. And we've seen it in the past with Nicholas Bentner, getting fined more for exposing the logo of a betting company on his pants after scoring a goal than someone would be for racial abuse. And then, of course, more recently, any footballer, a high-profile footballer that is found to have breached the FA's betting rules in any form, even if, like in the case of Kieran Trippier, it's just telling a couple of mates that he's joining Atletico Madrid before everyone else knows. Those offences tend to be dealt with much more harshly than any sort of racism or discrimination offences as well. And I don't think there's no moral counter argument to it. It is not right, but it is unfortunately also the world we live in. It's not just football. You look at every aspect of society, every decision seemingly made by governments of the UK, US, the whole Western world. It just seems the whole sort of capitalist world. It's, if you hit someone in the pocket, they take notice. And it's all about money. It's money moves people to mobilize. Fear of losing that money moves people to mobilize in a way that injustice never does. And that's sad. It's a real sad reality of the way the world is, but it's the reality of the way the world is.
Yeah, and 100% agree. Your spitting facts there, to be honest, is very sad that they don't really, show the same energy towards every situation. So, Dubois, do you just want to ask basically some other questions that we've got towards Liam, because we do have a few more to get through. Been a very good episode so far. So, yeah, Dubois, if you want to take it away with some other questions.
Yeah, the first one, Liam. We're going to touch upon the Brighton game, obviously, later today. Do you think the news that has come out is going to impact the game itself in any way? Do you think the players, it will have a knock-on effect on them, perhaps performance-wise? I guess if you're hearing news that there's a Super League, in effect, it seems as though the importance of the rest of Chelsea season is in sort of up in the air now. Are they fighting for top four when perhaps next season it will not mean anything? And do you think that will play a part in Tuchel's thinking, or do you think you expect to see the same Chelsea with the same sort of same sort of level that we've seen over the past couple of weeks? How do you think that will play out?
I don't think they'd be human if they could ignore it, honestly. I mean, I don't know about how you guys are feeling. I tweeted earlier, I have to keep reminding myself that Chelsea are playing a football match tonight.
100%.
And I'm down to go and cover it and write about it. And I still keep forgetting, because in the grand scheme of things, it just seems so utterly irrelevant now. And that's astonishing when you think that, as of last weekend until Sunday evening, Chelsea were in the final stretch of a season that promised so much. They're back in the top four conversation. Right, the West Brom result set them back, but they've got momentum, and they've got a great chance. They're favoured to win the FA Cup now after a great win over one of the best teams in Europe. In getting that win, I think they showed they're capable of winning the Champions League this season. So there's so much to play for. And this was at the heart of the question I asked to Thomas Tuchel on Monday. Because obviously Chelsea were typically keen to shut down Super League questions, but I thought this was very relevant to him and his job personally. Is any part of you worried that the fallout from this, any consequences that are meted out on Chelsea and the other clubs involved, could actually affect what you're trying to achieve on the pitch? And I thought he answered that really in the only way he could, which is basically to say, I don't know. I hope not. I hope calmer heads prevail on all sides, and sometimes in the middle of the storm is the calmest bit. I think he's trying to make the best of the situation, as you would expect any coach to do. But I can't believe that the players aren't thinking about it and talking about it all the time, because if we're feeling like the rest of this season is somewhat irrelevant now, imagine how they're feeling. And they've got all this noise buzzing around their heads of their clubs plunged them into a competition which could potentially see them banned from World Cups and European Championships. And I think there are probably a few heads in that dressing room that are just spinning at the moment, and it's completely understandable if they would be.
Yeah, so as you said, Liam, like, what does this hold for the significance of tonight? Like, does it matter if we finish top four now? I mean, we can even go into third, I think, if we win tonight. Obviously, you mentioned how the players and stuff, what are they thinking? It must be horrible for them. And yeah, for me personally, I don't know what to think, because obviously I still want to support Chelsea. I still want to watch the game and watch, hopefully, my favourite players like Havertz and other players like that, hopefully Pulisic. But again, like, what is the significance? What is the point of this now? And obviously the FA Cup final as well. I'd love to win that, but I mean, will that even go ahead? I guess the whole media and stuff are going to be back in Leicester, of course. We saw Gary Neville last night cheer for, there was like a list of fixtures that came up, and he was like, come on Brighton, come on Everton, I think it was. He was supporting all the teams that weren't involved in the Super League. So, as you said, it's a war on football. It's a complete war. And the fans have responded in a war-type nature as well. So, anyway, Dubois has one more question to ask. Then he'll give his opinion, and then we'll wrap it up, and yeah, that'll be that. So Dubois, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, so this question, I know you touched upon this a bit earlier, Liam, but it's sort of based around who was solely responsible for this at Chelsea. Was it Roman? I know we've heard Bruce Buck potentially having a meeting with the Chelsea players and staff, or Marina. Who was sort of the driving force behind, if you do know, about joining the European Super League? And also a second question to that is, knowing Tuchel's history, especially, I think he's renowned for a bit falling out with boards in the past. And I think at the clubs he's been to has been a key reason for his sacking. At most of them, I believe. Do you think it's where Tuchel has his hands tied here, that he's just recently joined, so he can't really have his say in a sense? I know we saw his press conference yesterday, but you could tell he was being quite conservative with his responses. And if you compare that to, say, Pep's responses or Klopp's, it's a vast difference. So what do you think your opinions on that are as well?
I think, first of all, on Tuchel, I mean, his response, I think, reflected his different position at Chelsea compared to Klopp and Pep. I think Guardiola probably has the most power of any of those three, because Manchester City built their entire club, like they structured their entire decision-making hierarchy solely to attract him. And so I think he has a bit more leeway to say what he wants. And of course, he's about to win the league again, which always helps. He has a bit more leeway to speak his mind. Klopp also does. Because of his connection with the Liverpool fans. But I think I think you even saw him on the side of diplomacy a little bit as well. And I think that's because, as he said, I think he feels a bit of a responsibility to try and hold the club together, as impossible as that seems to be at the moment, given how sort of alien to Liverpool's self-image this decision by their owners it seems to be. When it comes to Tuchel, he's got an 18-month contract. He could, if Chelsea were, to miss out on the top four and lose both trophies, it's not beyond the realm of possibility he could be let go in the summer. I don't think it's likely, because I think he's done a very good job and shown some very good progress. But the fundamental point is he doesn't have the same job security. He doesn't have the same influence at Chelsea. He's an employee, and he spoke like an employee, and I wouldn't expect him to speak any other way. When it comes to who's responsible at Chelsea, you know by now that Abramovich doesn't make any decision alone. He entrusts the day-to-day running of the club to Marina Granovskaya. He has other advisors around him who've been around him for years. Some of them have official positions at Chelsea, some of them don't. And of course, on sort of big issue club matters, not so much on the football decision-making side, but on the sort of big issue decisions that Chelsea make, Bruce Buck is always an influential voice at the table. But ultimately, this is not a PLC. This is not a shareholder club. This is not a club with different power bases. This is a club owned by one man, and Roman Abramovich is responsible for this decision, just as he is ultimately responsible for every big decision that Chelsea make, good or bad. They would not be in this Super League if he did not want to be in it. If he had not decided, and of course he probably won't ever come out and explain his reasons. So we'll have to figure them out for ourselves. But whatever his reasons were, he was the one who ultimately pushed the button on this. And the piece I wrote on Monday was that I think it comes. My opinion of it is it comes from the same aspect of Abramovich's personality that made him a good owner for all those years. That absolutely implacable desire to keep Chelsea at the top of the European game and to spend whatever it takes to keep them there. That Chelsea fans loved that from 2003 to Saturday. In terms of the teams that were built and the trophies that they won. But that same desire to keep Chelsea at the top level of the European game, I think, has underpinned this decision, because Abramovich has probably reached the conclusion that if Chelsea don't participate in this, they will no longer be part of the elite group of clubs. And that has always been his ultimate aspiration, is to put Chelsea there and keep them there. So he's responsible. And if you're a Chelsea fan that's angry about this, feeling betrayed about this, feeling that it goes against football and goes against the idea that you have of what your club should be, Abramovich is the man to look to because he ultimately makes all the big decisions.
Yeah, I think that's quite telling, especially as you said, he is making the final decisions, and there's been a lot of talk about from fans amongst fans about who's ultimately responsible, and that does clear that concept up quite a bit, especially as we know Roman's ambition to keep Chelsea as an elite club, and I guess some might argue that it's been successful in the sense that we've won multiple trophies, obviously since he's taken over, and he's always being a driving force behind our success. But again, this news has sort of understandably upset many fans due to the fact that it's taken away the game as we know it. And I think, again, my personal opinion, it sort of takes the sting away. It takes the excitement away. For example, for tonight's game, I know many fans have mentioned it. It just doesn't feel like a game day. It doesn't feel like there's anything to play for, and that's just not how it should feel when we're fighting for top four. And again, that's another topic that you can expand on, but we are running out of time. But before I hand over to Pius to close, one more question. Do you expect the players to speak out tonight after the game, Liam, or before the game? For example, Azpilicueta. I know we've seen a couple of players speak out, such as Milner, or do you expect them to remain tight-lipped in comparison to other clubs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always so difficult. I always feel sorry for players in big picture football stories like this, because it's not their job to sort out the governance of football. It's their job to play and play well. And the ones at top clubs do their jobs exceptionally well more often than not. That said, if they do speak out, and particularly if they do speak out in a sort of coordinated way, then it can have a big impact, because they ultimately are the show. They are the cast list, and the owners have nothing without them. And sometimes I think players don't quite realise the power that they do have in conversations like this. They've never really tried to use it. So far, we've only seen isolated players here or there. I know Patrick Bamford did a really nice interview after the game last night. I know James Milner, Bruno Fernandes have said things against the concept of a Super League, but it hasn't been anything coordinated yet. I think behind the scenes, a lot of players will be very worried about this, about the potential career-altering implications it could have for them. The lack of consultation, the fact that this was just a unilateral decision taken by the club that employs them. I don't think that's going to feel particularly good. But in terms of them actually speaking out against the club that pays their wages at this stage, when so much is still uncertain, I don't know. I don't know how. I don't know whether they will. I don't know whether they can. I don't even know really whether it's reasonable to expect them to. I'm sure that when that Premier League captain's call takes place, Cesar Azpilicueta will be a big voice in it. He was a big voice in the calls that took place during the pandemic response in the build up to Project Restart. That is kind of his personality. He's a guy with a strong sense of conscience and his own mind, and I don't think he'll be afraid to get his point across to the other captains, and probably in time to the club as well. What I would really like to see, which I don't know if it will ever happen, is for us to end up at some point with a really strong players' union that has proper teeth, because FIFA doesn't have proper teeth. And I think if you were going to have any sort of Super League, I've seen it compared to the NBA a lot. The key difference for me between this proposed Super League and the NBA is that there are no checks and balances on the Super League owners. In the NBA, you have a really strong players' union that can actually drive and fight for the players' interests against the owners. And you have a commissioner who, while he ultimately works for the owners, has to try and find a way to mediate between the two. And it often results in a compromise. This Super League is run, as proposed, is run by billionaires for billionaires. So what I would really like to see is for footballers to actually band together and form a proper union that has real teeth, that can fight for their interests, whether that's in this new proposed Super League or even within the current, the power structure, the existing power structure of European football, because I think it's something that is quite lacking at the moment.
100% agree. I think that'd be amazing. Like, I just feel like players, I mean, they don't speak up enough, but can they speak up enough? Like, as you mentioned, is it reasonable to ask of them for, you know, Chelsea fans, like, we all want players to come out and say things, but can they? And that would be really good to have, like, a players' union, maybe the captains and stuff of each club or something. Just have more power, to have more influence, because as you said, I don't feel like they realise how much influence they have. You know, another thing that's being mentioned is, will they refuse to play? Will they go on strike? Is that reasonable? I mean,
that's the thing. That's the thing. It's not that something like that is not feasible without a union, because that's coordinated action. That needs to be. It's so difficult. I mean, how many hundreds of players would you be talking about? Like all the domestic leagues, or you know, that to coordinate between numbers of that size, you would need a proper centralised power structure, which could only be a union. I don't think it's reasonable to expect individual players to, you know, say like Kevin De Bruyne to hand in a transfer request at Man City saying that, you know, the decision you've taken has harmed my career. It could happen, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect any one footballer to take a stand like that, as powerful as it would be, because they're just one person. But if they had an opportunity to actually be to mobilise together, I think that would remove a lot of the fear that individual footballers feel about speaking out against their owners, and I think it would actually get a lot more done. When you look at the way European football's been over the last few years, and UEFA have been complicit in this, the domestic leagues have been complicit in this. Footballers have been they're at the top level. They're incredibly well paid, obviously, but they've also been steadily more exploited in terms of the schedule. Year on year, UEFA have expanded competitions, introduced the Nations League. You know, FIFA are talking about this expanded Club World Cup through the summer. You've got clubs doing ever more elaborate pre-season and post-season tours before the pandemic. You've got just more games, less recovery time, and more injuries that can affect players' careers. And I think if you had a proper players' union, this stuff wouldn't be happening, because they'd be able to fight against this stuff. And the Super League is just kind of a culmination of that.
Exactly. So I think that's the next thing that needs to happen. Whether it will happen or not, I don't know. But I think that's a fantastic suggestion. And to be honest, guys, I think it's been a fantastic episode in general. We've got through a lot of different things. So yeah, Liam, just thank you so much for coming on. You don't have to do this, but we're very appreciative that you've spoken to us, I think 2 or 3 times now. So yeah, it's really nice to have you on and have a discussion every now and again, especially on this important issue. We really appreciate your opinions. And obviously, guys, go and check out The Athletic and stuff. Liam does some amazing pieces on different things, whether it be analysis or obviously information articles and stuff like that with The Athletic. So, Liam, any final words before we end this episode? Again, thank you so much for coming on and just sharing your views and sharing some information and more light to Chelsea fans, because I know that in a time of uncertainty and everyone wants to know what's happening, it can be really nice to have a sit down with someone like you for, 30-40 minutes or so and just get through things one by one. And hopefully you guys listening to this can understand a little bit more now about what's going on. And obviously it can change. But yeah, Liam, thank you so much for coming on. Seriously, really appreciate it.
No worries, guys. Yeah, I've been on a couple of times before, and one thing I've always appreciated is that the questions are always intelligent and coming from people that are really thinking in quite a nuanced way about what's going on at Chelsea and about in football in general. And I think that's, I guess, if I had a final thought, a Jerry Springer's final thought, it would probably be that. It's just that we're going to need the ability to think in a slightly more nuanced way for what's to come in terms of the battle for football, because I think battle lines are going to be drawn and people are going to take up extreme positions, which seems like every conversation we have in every walk of life these days is between 2 opposing camps and taking up extreme positions. But I think the only way that we get any sort of vaguely satisfactory resolution to all of this is if there's some sort of nuance involved and people are prepared to be vaguely reasonable in conversations at the top of football. And it's not looking hugely likely at the moment, but yeah, we'll see where it all goes.
Yeah, and I think that's a fitting ending as well. I mean, just see where it all goes. We have to think deeper than just having a rant and having a rage, because although I've had a rage and a rant about how I feel, when you sit down and stuff, you just have to try and process the information we have and just try and think deeper. Like, what is the deeper meaning of all this? Why have we done it? Why have all the clubs done it? Why now? So yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Liam. If you guys have enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and comment down below. And obviously, if you're listening on Spotify, thank you very much for listening. DM me your thoughts or reply to the tweet what you thought about this episode. And yeah, hopefully, Liam, we can have you on again in the future and in the next few months or something. And yeah, guys, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.